All right, it is time for a Truth Report takedown. We're probably ascending the most high mountain of all today. It's bound to be the most controversial discussion, so I had to bring in someone who's really smart and has a handle on things. He's definitely not arguing for racism, but we're arguing about whether or not racism is the worst crime of all, because it's been weaponized that way by the left. And I'm going to kind of try the best I possibly can to give the steel man argument from that point of view. And to argue the opposite side, I have Colonel Chris Wyatt, who is well known to people who watch my show and people who are paying attention to South African media. He has a huge audience of his own. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Chris, nice to see you.
Gareth, thanks. I really love your backdrop there. That's an awesome looking bookshelf. I'm kind of envious. I've got this, I've got the Mr. Price bookshelves behind me there. So I'm kind of envious. Thanks for the invite.
All right. Well, I promise you it's real, and it's always real when we have these conversations. So I'm delighted to have you on. Let me come at this from the point of view of people, particularly in America, but we'll look at South Africa as well, who argue that actually, if you are found guilty of racism, that is the most terrible thing, and that you should be treated in a way that probably they think racists would want to treat them. Anyway, the biggest argument here, and perhaps it would be helpful for you to just illustrate something that you and I have spoken about before, the difference between bigotry and racism, because I think it's an important distinction.
So the distinction for me is that so many times today in America and in South Africa, people just automatically go racism, racism, racism. But oftentimes what they're talking about is bigotry. And bigotry is learned behavior. Yeah, we learn, and people, please don't clip this and claim that I'm saying these things. I'm not. But we hear idiotic things like Jews are miserly, or Jews have all the money, or black people are lazy, or Scandinavians are hardworking. These are stereotypes that are born out of a degree of truth sometimes. But the point is that it's learned behavior. People learn these things from others. Babies aren't born with bigotry or racism. They just don't have it, but they learn it. The problem with racism is it's so deep in one's heart. A racist is someone, in my view, who wants to give advantage or take disadvantage to people based on their skin pigmentation and their so-called race. But I throw the whole thing out the window. It's a socialist, not socialist, a social construct by 19th century Europeans to justify their expansion around the world. They were trying to make a point and also divide the world up. That's their view on the world. And if we weren't the same race, we wouldn't be able to knock boots, and there wouldn't be any colored folks. I mean, and that would be a sad tragedy. South Africa has some really cool colored people. So I'm just saying, it's bigotry and racism are two very distinct things. If people are bigots, it's not nice. It's not good. But I can change a bigot. I can show them the folly of their ways. And if they're honest people, they'll accept that and they'll change over time. But it's hard to change a racist. That's something that's in their heart. They believe it, and they will push that as long as the day goes.
Okay, so that sounds great. Let's begin with probably the most obvious of these arguments from people who believe this. Racism is the worst crime because it dehumanizes at scale. So it reduces people, as per your definition just now, based on skin, ancestry, ethnic origin, whatever it might be, enabling things like slavery and genocide, and in South Africa, apartheid. No other prejudice has institutionalized evil as efficiently as racism. What do you think of that?
Well, I would have to agree that racism is bad. I mean, to make a decision about someone, to give them advantage, to discriminate against them based on immutable fact. I didn't choose to be pink or white. I didn't choose to be black or brown. I have no say over that. That's DNA. And that gets combined based on your heritage and where you come from. So giving people advantage based on their skin color is the ultimate in stupidity. I mean, you should judge people, as Dr. King said, on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And I agree that racism does dehumanize people. And that's the intent. That's why it's so evil. I think we agree on that point.
All right. What about the argument that intention is important here? I mean, for people who have been called racist, they'll always say, no, I didn't mean to be racist. But the argument from the other side is you don't need to be intentional to do harm. The system keeps producing the same racial inequalities and disparities. So that is structural racism, right? It's invisible to those who it benefits. What do you think of that argument?
Well, I think once again, we have a silly argument here. I think a genuine racist is well aware of what their actions accomplish. They know that's why they're racist. They want to achieve this disparity. It's not hidden for them. The concept that it's invisible to a racist, that argument it just doesn't hold water with me. And as far as people benefiting from structural racism, I have an issue with that as well. I mean, if that's the case, then let's be honest about America. America's Black community has benefited from structural racism for 50 years, courtesy of affirmative action. Affirmative action kept white and Asian students out of Ivy League schools for the last 40 years to the detriment of society, allowing people to enter law school at Harvard simply because of their skin color. Even though they're not prepared for it, they were one of the poorest candidates, but they get a bump in points to enter because of their skin color. They're unprepared. They go to school, they wash out, or they're poor students, and they become no lawyers or poor lawyers. That doesn't help society. You help society by fixing the structural problems at the bottom, and you address that by going to places not based on skin color, but based on socioeconomic factors like wealth and poor communities where resources need to go. You level the playing field by evening the opportunities for people. I don't buy the structural racism thing. It's really the argument, I think, of weak-minded people who come with this argument.
Okay, so you often hear people saying that all white people are racist, right? And you hear this often from the left, often from white people themselves. Like, I carry a whole lot of inherent racism. There's nothing I can do about it. And they go into these Maoist struggle sessions with themselves and whoever will listen, usually a very small audience. But do you think that there's anything about that is perhaps worth exploring and looking into? Do you think it's been done to death?
Well, I think definitely we can make the argument there are certain behaviors and certain things that are encoded in DNA. I mean, that's probably how birds learn how to travel and migrate from one part of the world to the other. It's an fair argument that that's encoded in their DNA, but I seriously doubt that racism is encoded in their DNA. If you believe in evolution of human beings, we've been around for at least 180,000 years, and we've changed a bit in those 180,000 years. But racism, in the sense we talk about today, is something that's only been on the plate for about 150 years or so, maybe 200 max. So it clearly hasn't had a chance to be encoded in our DNA. I don't buy that argument that because I'm white, I'm a racist. That's nonsense. That's just this silly guilt over people who have privilege or live a comfy, luxurious life, and they can't accept that it's okay to be successful because they didn't earn it. When you earn it like I did, and others like Ross Perot, and you come from nothing and you make your fortune, you make your way in life, you appreciate the fact that merit is what wins the day. So I don't buy the argument that people are inherently racist. And I find it quite nauseating, in fact, when these people run around and say, well, you're a racist or you're the beneficiary of apartheid. I mean, it's like South Africa. Let's start telling the truth here. The majority of South Africans were born after apartheid ended. Most white South Africans didn't live during apartheid. That's just a statement of fact. And every day the percentage gets higher as people die off and new kids are born. This stupidity of living in the past is hampering South Africa, and it has hampered America.
So you're American and South African. I consider you both. Well, who do you think who's doing the racism thing better? Who's handling it better? Who do you think has got a better grasp on this problem? Because it seems to be enduring. And in America, you could argue it's got a lot worse since Barack Obama, although many people thought that would be the end of racism in some ways. And in South Africa, we've gone up and down. And the average South African probably doesn't think about it too much, but we're told in the media it's hugely important. So what do you believe?
Well, as I said earlier, there will always be racists. There will always be stupid people. And, stupid people should wear signs. That way you wouldn't ask them questions. Hey, sorry, I didn't see your sign. No, stupid people should wear signs. That way you wouldn't. There'll always be racists, unfortunately. The good news, Gareth, is that genuine racists are a small percentage of the population. Most of us suffer from some form of bigotry. We have a warped view because we mislearned or someone told us something and we bought into it, or we were raised a certain way. But that can be unlearned. But here's the situation. The media makes a big deal about this because it sells ink. It gets clicks, it gets views, it gets people to tune in because it's attention getting.
And what about in South Africa? Because people will argue here that affirmative action was necessary to redress the imbalances of the past, and that racism has to be defeated by people being given advantage over others, despite 30 years of a new dispensation. Do you think we've got to carry on with this for another 50, 100, 200 years until people who believe in perfect equity are satisfied?
Well, to that I say balderdash, poppycock. There was no need for that, none whatsoever. I mean, this is just rubbish. And people are, whoa, they're going to look, folks, address all hate mail to Gareth, not to me. I'm just a guest. No, but seriously, here's the situation. You don't fix historical inequities by creating new historical inequities. You fix historical inequities by leveling the playing field. How do you level the playing field? Not by using racist legislation, but by directing resources to places that were historically disadvantaged or places that didn't have the resources to do it. So instead of firing all the qualified Afrikaans and English-speaking white teachers because they're white, or offering them severance packages to get out of education, and hiring unqualified black teachers who tend to prey on 11 and 12-year-old girls and give them HIV and knock them up and destroy them socially, instead of doing that, perhaps real money should have been put in education, and efforts should have been made to educate and train more black, colored, Indian educators to go into these communities and put money in education. Had effort been put into policing to make the country safe, had money been put in education, and had a national sovereign wealth fund been created instead of carving out segments of Old Mutual and Anglo-American and giving it to the likes of Tokyo Sexuality and Patrice Motsepe and Cyril Ramaphosa and the glitterati elites. Had that money been put there, then South Africans have a national sovereign wealth fund with lots of resources today that could spin out checks to create an ownership society. You'd have an education system that was actually educating instead of trying to convince South Africans that getting 30% in 3 subjects and 40% in your first language means you've graduated, you've matriculated from high school, and you're eligible to go to college. That is just ludicrous. All they've done is ruin education. You know, Cyril Ramaphosa is fond of saying, Bantu education is worse than no education at all. And I agree. The ANC Bantu education policies have been disastrous for South Africa, and that's the problem. You're churning out people who are not prepared to survive in the modern world. Instead of focusing on the 4th Industrial Revolution, we've got the ANC trying to put 1 million black people into subsistence farming, thereby ensuring that they live in abject poverty for their entire existence. This is stupid policy. It's not racist. It's just stupid. And this is a problem. And these are people who believe in socialism and believe that communism works. And how many times do we have to prove it does not work? You improve
That's a whole
things
other discussion.
not by
yeah.
You improve things not by giving artificial advantage to people based on their skin color, handing them jobs, or coming up with nonsense. Well, only 4% of managers can be white. What is that? White males. The best people should be hired. And if the best people consistently are white, then there's a systemic problem in your education system and opportunity there. That's what you fix. Anyway, that's the problem here. It's not racism. It's stupidity.
Well, I love that. That's a great point to end this on. And I think people can make up their own minds based on your very cogent arguments and my more flimsy ones, whether or not they agree that racism is the most terrible thing afflicting the world today, and whether or not it actually has consequences for ordinary South Africans and Americans. Thank you, Chris.
It's my pleasure, Gareth. Unfortunately, this is a topic we could spend 6 hours talking about and tease out so many things. I hope that the audience finds this useful and informative. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm sure they will. Thank you so much.